What's going on, guys? So today I wanted to do basically an informal review of the Super Scout Scout machine. You guys see it in every video, but I realized I've never really done any all-encompassing review of my paramotor. So this video is going to be basically my paramotor and why I fly it. Before we get into it, quick disclaimer. I know people will be like, oh, this is a biased review because you're sponsored by Team Fly Halo. Little backstory. I was flying the Scout for probably like a year and a half or something before Team Fly Halo jumped on board and started supporting me. Either way, I wanted to do a semi-formal review and give you guys honest pros and cons based on my experience of the Scout machine. My nickname for the paramotor is the Super Scout Machine, but it's formerly known as the Scout Carbon. This particular model is powered by a Vitarazi Moster 185 Plus. It's got an E-prop 130 centimeter on it. Retail cost is right at about $8,500 for everything you see here, minus the reserve parachute. I'm gonna enlist the help of a Jacqueline to come film me, and we're gonna do a thing. How do I start this? Billy Mays here with the new Scout machine. I want to talk about some of the key features of the Scout machine, and I actually copied some of the categories that Jeff Goen from footflyer.com uses to review paramotors. So we're gonna get into those, but first off, I want to say, like, there's no perfect paramotor. People are always like, what's the best paramotor? Which one should I buy? And I don't think there is a best paramotor. There's a best paramotor probably for each person or each purpose, and they all kind of shine in their own sort of way. And I think the way that the Scout machine shines most often is the aerodynamic torque compensation. So we'll talk about that more later. But in general, people look at this and they're like, wow, it's got the aerodynamic torque compensation, and they overlook everything else that's cool about it. So first off, aerodynamic torque compensation, what is it and why does the Scout use it? Paramotors have giant propellers on the back that spin around in circles, and it creates torque. And when you're hooked into your glider, torque causes you to do weird things under power. It makes you like turn. So the way that paramotors normally compensate for that is just geometry changes in the harness to weight shift. The Scout does it by compensating for that aerodynamically. And that's why these spars are giant fins. They're not just straight tubes. So pretty much what you end up with is through the entire power range, you get a very neutral flying machine. All right, so the first category from Footflyer is the harness and suspension. So like I mentioned about the torque thing, this paramotor doesn't use any offsets on the harness to compensate for torque. So that means the harness by itself, the weight shift arms are all perfectly symmetrical, which is awesome. I really like that. Second cool thing about this harness is it's G tested to 15 Gs. As you get into acro and that sort of thing, you don't have to worry about arms twisting or anything weird like that. I've encountered that on my previous paramotors where you do a wing over and the arm would bend. This guy, you don't have to worry about it. If you look close, like the webbing on the harness is like massively oversized. These shackle pieces are oversized. These weight shift arms will never bend. I've never had an issue with them. The other cool thing with the harness is that you actually get a reclined angle on the harness. So when you're in the air, the idea is to have the thrust line perfectly vertical, but the harness is actually offset by about 10 degrees, which makes it even more comfortable in the air. All right, so the next category is weight. Now, on the sliding scale of paramotor weights, I would rate the Scout somewhere in the middle. It's not a really heavy paramotor, but it's also not the lightest. It weighs in at about 60 pounds with the fuel tank empty and no reserve. That's just my personal scale I put it on. I got 60 pounds. To me, I'm about a 160 pound dude, relatively fit, and I don't struggle with that amount of weight. People that probably fall into like 135 pounds or less, that's where you want to start saying like this paramotor might be a little too heavy for them. Next category is starting procedure. This engine, it has a flash starter or a semi-flash, I don't even know what they call it, but basically it's not a direct drive, it has a spring, so there is a little bit of finesse that you have to develop. I know some people, Woody, struggle with it, but it takes a little finesse and getting used to figure out the exact prime you need and the exact stroke you need on the starter. These motors are now becoming available with a dual start, which is e-start and pull start, so that's cool. Next category is launch characteristics. As far as launches go, the Scout is a little bit unique because remember that thrust angle I talked about earlier? That actually makes it a little bit harder to launch. And in the beginning, you have to develop a sort of feel to get that. and really reinforce your lean back technique on launch, or it's gonna push you at the ground. Once you get that technique down, it's a non-issue. I don't think about it, it just happens and the form takes you away. Next category is flight. So this is where the Scout shines. I think it's the best flying paramotor. Miro, the designer of the Scout, has an awesome multi-part series that goes into every single detail of how he engineered and designed this to fly really, really well. And when you get in the air with it, it's like just really intuitive, I think. And a lot of that has to do with the symmetry of the harness and how the torque is compensated aerodynamically. So through aerobatic maneuvers, I think it's pretty much the best paramotor you can get for doing the type of acro that I do. Also, a big component is weight shift. The way the glider is suspended on these weight shift arms is what basically determines how well the paramotor weight shifts. And I've flown a number of other paramotors that use the same configuration, weight shift arms, or swing arms, swan arms, whatever you want to call them. This one I think does it best, and the way it does it is, the best way to describe it is it takes very little movement for big results. Other paramotors I've flown, they get the same results, but the harness moves a whole lot. This just feels more like power steering, like it's a small movement with a big result. So weight shift, I give it an A+. All right, next category is thrust. As far as thrust goes, that's determined by the Moster 185 Plus by Viterazzi. It's 185cc two-stroke, so it's got enough power for tandems, enough power for big guys. I'm running a 130 centimeter E-prop on here. I have a video where I tested different props. The E-prop is my favorite. Doesn't give the most top-end thrust, but it has really snappy acceleration. That's one thing I can say about the Moster 185. It has really great throttle resolution, so you have very fine control. It has a nice little power band. It does exist, but it's very controllable. As far as vibrations go, I would rate it towards the bottom of the vibration scale. It's not the smoothest engine I've ever flown, but it definitely doesn't bother you with the vibrations. They're very like small, fast vibrations that are easy to deal with and you don't even think about. All right, next category is endurance. The fuel tank on this motor, we've got 12 liters, which is I think like 3 gallons. And generally it depends on a whole lot of factors, your personal weight, your wing choice, your flying style. The general rule of thumb I use is I burn about 1 gallon an hour. So if I fill that fuel tank up, I'm gonna get close to 3 hours of flight time. All right, next category is safety. As far as safety goes, there's a couple things that the Scout has that are awesome. The first is the safe start. I have a safety series video on ground starting paramotors. It's one of the most dangerous things you can do with a paramotor. Not even flying it, but pull starting it on the ground. If something happens with your throttle cable and it goes to full throttle, it falls over and eats you and slashes up your face. The Scout has an electronic device that is made to try to prevent that. Now what it does is if you hit the throttle with the safe start on within like 7 seconds of starting the motor, it automatically kills it past a certain RPM. So that's a good preventative measure to try to save yourself. Next up for safety, the netting. Now netting, in my opinion, generally isn't gonna save your hand from going through the prop, and this netting is no different. I don't treat it as if it's gonna save my arm from going through it, but it does have a nice fine mesh, so it'll keep like brake toggles and everything from getting close. Another cool safety feature is the reserve options that this motor has, and I don't know of a lot of other paramotors that offer this, but underneath the harness it has a reserve pouch that you can pack a reserve into. Now personally, I don't use this 99% of the time. Because of the added bulk down here, I like the bulk in my lap rather than under the seat. But the cool thing is, on the Icarus race, when I had a duffel bag on my lap, I had nowhere else to put the reserve, so I packed it underneath the seat. It's really convenient. The handle gets mounted right here, so in the case you have to throw your reserve, it's very easy to access. The other thing is if you want to run a dual reserve system, it'd be very easy to pack one reserve under the seat and one in your lap and you'd be good to go. Next category is construction. As far as construction goes, the Scout has basically an aluminum subframe that the engine's mounted onto, and then an aluminum enduro stand, they call it. Aside from that, the spars and the hoop section is all carbon fiber. So a common question a lot of people always ask is how durable is this carbon fiber? I would say on a range of all paramotors, it's more on the fragile end. I haven't had that many issues with it over time that I would actually call it a con. You guys know on the Icarus race, I fell over and broke some spars.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We're down.
And that's because I legitimately fell on it. I've had a lot of butt landings on this enduro stand without any issues. It's hit the ground really hard and never cracked anything, but it's something you want to take into account. I would say, honestly, it's not the best beginner paramotor ever. Tons of people have this as their first paramotor, and I would say if you're going to get quality training and go through the whole process of learning to fly the correct way, you'd have no problems flying this as your first paramotor. Overall, it is a little bit more fragile than most paramotors, but on the flip side, it's very repairable, which is one of the last categories. Repairability on this is really good. I've never come into a situation that I couldn't repair this paramotor. You can see on my lower hoop section, I've got carbon fiber patches down here that I put on. I've got more carbon fiber patches on a spar from when a toolbox hit it. It's very simple to repair. If you get the right carbon fiber and epoxy supplies, you could destroy this thing and fix it in an afternoon. All right, our final category is transport. And I would rate the Scout at the top of the line for ease of disassembly, if you will. I've timed myself, and taking this thing apart is about 10 minutes. Putting it back together is about 10 minutes also. It's very easy to pop these frame sections apart, pull the spars off. You can even take the enduro stand off. And the Scout comes with all kinds of bags that you can put those parts into. So if I had to fit it in the back of my car, I could pretty easily. All right, so now I have some questions from Instagram. First question, is the Super Scout scout machine good at restarting in the air when you kill it? Yes, I've never had an issue with restarting my motor. Next question, how many Scouts does one need to own before you own too many Scouts? The answer is there's never too many Scouts. Next question, how often do you have to do periodic maintenance? Also, what is the cost involved with that maintenance? So a while back, I started a maintenance series, and people have asked about that because there was honestly like one episode, and that episode was the bushing kit for the exhaust. These motors use a little brass bushing, and the springs get changed, and I also do the gasket every 25 hours. Beyond that, I've had very little issues with my Repairability Mosters. You guys know after the Icarus race, I had a clutch issue and I replaced that clutch, but aside from that, I really don't encounter many periodic maintenance issues. Next question, do you ever plan on getting a better motor? In my opinion, like I said, there's no perfect paramotor, but there's a perfect paramotor for each person. And I think the Scout is the perfect motor for myself, and I've been satisfied with it over the years. So if something bigger and better comes out that has, more features that go with my style, then yeah, I'd go for that. But currently, I don't see anything really on the market that I would consider replacing my Scout with. Next question, and this is a good one. You aren't using the standard Scout throttle. What throttle do you use and why did you switch? That's one thing I kind of forgot to mention. The stock throttle that comes with the Repairability, I honestly don't like it. I don't like the finger arrangement. So I switched to an air conception throttle, and that's more like the one I learned on. So that's the one I prefer. If you're a new pilot and you learn on the Repairability throttle, you'll probably prefer that one. All right, so that's all the questions I've got. As always, drop a like if you liked the video, and don't forget to check out the sweet Paramotor merch in the merch store. We got a cool video coming up next, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, till the next one, peace out.